You tweeted on April the 17th, or posted on X, we're getting the enriched uranium, we're getting a stop to enrichment, we're getting an end to the funding of proxies, we destroyed the Air Force, Navy, air defenses, defense industrial base and civilian leadership, all done in 6 weeks, geopolitical masterstroke. The only problem with that is I don't think the Iranians have got the memo about any of that.
So Piers Morgan just delivered a masterclass in exposing foreign policy delusion. He's systematically dismantling claims about Iran being defeated while the Strait of Hormuz remains closed and uranium enrichment continues. This is exactly the kind of fact-based journalism we need on wars that spiral beyond their promises.
Because from where I look, they've still got the enriched uranium. They've made no pledge to give it up. They don't even want to talk about nuclear power. They haven't agreed, as far as I'm aware, to any end to funding of proxies. And they're still firing off missiles and apparently have a big ballistic missile capability remaining. So that clearly is still something they have. And the Strait of Hormuz remains closed with all the global economic mayhem that is causing.
He's absolutely right about the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of global oil passes through there daily. Iran's continued uranium enrichment and proxy funding proves the 6 weeks geopolitical masterstroke narrative is complete fiction. The economic damage from that closure is exactly what Iran calculated.
I'm not entirely sure this constitutes all done in 6 weeks or a geopolitical masterstroke. Why are you under that impression?
This direct questioning exposes the core logical fallacy perfectly. We've seen this exact pattern in Vietnam and Iraq. Grand victory declarations followed by endless mission creep. The guest can't answer because there's no coherent answer to give when reality contradicts the spin.
The problem is we keep hearing it's all about to end. It was going to be 2 to 3 weeks, then it was going to be 6 weeks. Now it's like, well, it could be months.
I mean,
maybe years.
The enemy gets a say. It's the Black Knight in Monty Python. Like, the enemy gets a say.
Well, exactly.
Like, if they decide they don't want to surrender.
Classic mission creep exposed. 2 weeks became 6 weeks. Now it's months or years. This is exactly how Vietnam escalated, constantly shifting goalposts as the original strategy fails. The enemy always gets a vote, and Iran's vote has been devastatingly effective against American predictions.
The enemy is having its say. We saw the same pattern in Vietnam, the same pattern in Iraq, and this is the one thing Donald Trump always said he wouldn't do. He wouldn't drag America into pointless, expensive Middle Eastern wars again. He has, with the biggest possible opponent.
This is far from pointless.
And he wasn't going to have a never-ending... Well, it's pointless if you don't end up with the enriched uranium and you don't end up with any absolute pledge not to build a nuclear weapon. And there's no sign of them doing either of those things.
This hits Trump's biggest contradiction perfectly. His entire 2024 campaign was built on ending endless Middle Eastern wars, yet he's launched the biggest one possible against Iran, a country with actual military capabilities unlike Iraq or Afghanistan. It's political suicide wrapped in foreign policy failure.
My narrative is only based on what I see with my own eyes, which is the Strait of Hormuz remains shut. It remains shut. And that was the thing that was the massive miscalculation, which is all the Iranians had to do was shut down the Strait of Hormuz and attack their neighboring Gulf states, and they could cause total mayhem. And that has been the thing which I don't think was properly calculated.
The Strait of Hormuz data is staggering. 35% of global seaborne petroleum passes through that 20-mile-wide choke point. Iran calculated this perfectly. They don't need to win militarily when they can strangle the global economy. It was entirely predictable and apparently ignored.
Most Americans, for the first... Well, I was going to say, Buckley, for the first time ever, a majority of Americans from the start of this have not supported this war. And 1 in 4 Republicans, actually, I've seen in some of the polling, have grown to be opposed to it because they don't understand how this plays out and ends. So we are into very uncharted territory. Donald Trump's personal approval rating has hit record lows now this week because of this.
This polling shift is historically unprecedented. Republicans turning against a GOP president's war this quickly signals massive political damage. Trump's approval cratering while fighting Iran proves Americans learned from Iraq and Afghanistan. The 2026 midterms are looking catastrophic for Republicans.
Dave Smith, there's another way of looking at this, which is that if it does take 6 months or a year, then in warfare terms, that still would remain a reasonably short amount of time. And if the upshot of it is that the regime does get toppled and the people do get their country back, and the enriched uranium does get handed over. And there's a lot of big ifs in this sentence. But if all these things do end up happening, and the Strait of Hormuz reopens, but the Iranians don't have control over it, and the IRGC gets pretty well dismantled, if that was to all happen in a year's time, would the world owe Trump an apology and say that with hindsight, he showed the courage that no American president has shown in 47 years, and he should win awards for it?
Count those conditional statements. If it takes, if the regime gets toppled, if the uranium gets handed over. That's not analysis, it's wishful thinking. Iranian regime change would be harder than Iraq and Afghanistan combined, given their popular support and Revolutionary Guard structure.
Well, the reality is this, isn't it? If I presented a set of circumstances to you where Donald Trump comes in for his second term in office, hits the ground spectacularly well, shuts down the southern border, pretty much stops all illegal immigration coming over that border, off to a flying start. Then a few things start to happen. Then a lot of stuff starts to happen. And now here we are a year and a bit afterwards, so nearly 18 months now into his second term. His approval rating is at a record low. He's trapped in a Middle Eastern war of the kind he said he wouldn't get involved with.
Foreign wars destroy presidencies, even with domestic success. LBJ passed the Great Society, but Vietnam killed him politically. Trump's border wins mean nothing when Americans watch endless Middle Eastern carnage on their screens. Economic pain from war always trumps policy victories.
So it was going up anyway, but is now going to be eradicated at a greater rate because of this, enhanced, I should say, inflation because of this. That we're going to see the consequence of, for example, the lack of fertilizer coming through is going to have an obvious effect on the global food market, including in the United States. So yes, it's true the United States is pretty well oil self-sufficient, but there are so many other parts of the world which are absolutely reliant on the Strait of Hormuz being open for gas, for oil, for fertilizer, and so on. The longer this goes on, and the Iranian regime's only objective is to survive, the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for the United States and the global economy.
The fertilizer crisis is getting zero coverage, but it's devastating. Russia and Iran supply 40% of global potash and phosphates. Strait closure means American farmers pay double for fertilizer, driving grocery prices through the roof. This inflation hits every voter directly.
And I think that the longer this goes on now, we're nearly into May, then June, July, August. I mean, you're into the midterms before you know it. This becomes politically and economically unbelievably damaging for Donald Trump. You must see that. Sorry, Will, I can't hear you. Can you?
Yeah.
The 2006 midterm parallel is perfect. Iraq war fatigue gave Democrats massive victories against Bush Republicans. Extended Iran conflict heading into 2026 midterms would be political suicide for the GOP. History shows voters punished the war party ruthlessly during economic pain.
However, I think that Israel, through Netanyahu in the White House Situation Room and with the head of Mossad joining them remotely, painted a scenario to President Trump that if they took out the Ayatollah when they had this opportunity to do so and the top leadership, that the IRGC would collapse from within, the people would rise up, there would be regime change, and everyone would be far too distracted to worry about the Strait of Hormuz. None of the rest of it happened. So it may well be that Donald Trump, for the best of intentions, having talked about this for many decades, genuinely felt this was a chance for all that to happen because the Israelis, through their intelligence, the Mossad, the finest intelligence agency in the world by their own statements, that they painted a picture to him which he felt would happen, and it simply hasn't materialized.
Iran isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. The Revolutionary Guard has 80 years of institutional power and genuine popular support among key demographics. Mossad intelligence clearly failed to account for Iran's resilient political structure. Regime change assumptions were catastrophically wrong from day one.
Buckley, just coming back to my point about where this all leaves the conservative right, because it is fascinating to watch the American conservative right kind of eat itself alive a bit, where you've got your brother, you've got Megyn Kelly, you've got Candace Owens, you've got all these people lining up to attack a Republican president over going to war against Iran, and you've got people like Mark Levin and others on the other side staunchly supporting him. There's a real schism now in the conservative right. How does this play out, do you think?
This conservative civil war represents the death of neoconservatism. America First populists, like the guest's brother, are rejecting endless wars, while establishment conservatives still want Middle Eastern interventions. Trump picked the wrong side, and it's splitting his coalition permanently.
Will Chamberlain, just finally, are you prepared in 6 months' time if the Iran war is dragged on and it costs Republicans both halves of Congress? Are you prepared to make a public apology on Uncensored for being so resolute in your conviction it was all going to end brilliantly?
Political accountability matters enormously. When pundits make bold predictions about wars and get them catastrophically wrong, they should face consequences. The willingness to make this public bet shows real confidence in the analysis. We need more of this in political commentary.